Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-844-4-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
So, tell us about your band reforming.
Okay, yeah, so my friends and backlisted listeners, in fact, happy birthday, gentlemen. Neil and Tim had a joint 50th birthday party. And I used
Neon Tim? Was that?
Neil and Tim.
Oh, I thought that was the name of your band.
Neon Tim.
Quite a good name. Good name.
Yeah.
Tim, I used to play in a band with Tim called the Gene Clark Five, which is an extremely esoteric joke, and we split due to lack of interest. But then when we got back together last weekend, for the first time, rather than 2 of us, there were actually 5 of us.
What did you play?
It's the best drummer that I've ever played with. It's a guy called Bryn, and he used to be the drummer in the bands the Fabulous Poodles and Freur, and Freur went on to become Underworld. So imagine someone who, I can't play the guitar very well, right? But I'm playing with a really good drummer.
Some people and an actual drummer.
And a really good musical director as well called Tim Cronin. Okay, this is what we played. We played You Ain't Going Nowhere, the Bob Dylan song. Mm-hmm. We played September Girls by Big Star. We played Feel a Whole Lot Better by the Byrds. And then we segued into tracks that the Birthday Boys wanted to hear. So we played Understanding Jane by the Icicle Works. Have you ever heard that?
I've heard it, yeah.
Yeah, for a long time ago, from the 80s. It was really good fun.
McNabb fan.
Also, because my guitar abilities are fairly limited, when they heard me play it through once, they went, I'll tell you what you could do on this song, Andy. How about giving us some feedback? Can do. So, fortunately, my son wasn't there to see me make an utter tit of myself as I threw some shapes. I came off stage and somebody said to me, wow, that was great. You really look like you were enjoying yourself, which I was, unlike many members of the audience. But it was really, really good fun. And it made me think, I love making music, singing and showing off. I love playing music. I ought to play music more.
Yeah.
Did you ever play in a band, Jim?
Yeah, we had a school band called the Chartered Accountants. Ramones and Stiff Little Fingers covers. It's really pretty basic.
What did you play?
I did a bit of bass, but I was lead singer.
Wow.
Well, it's just a lot of shouting. But we were quite good. We wrote a few songs. We actually wrote a song that Anita Brookner, the subject of today's podcast, would have loved. It was called Middle Class Twats. Which
Can you remember any of the lyrics?
Can you sing it?
You and your problems can sit and rot because you're all just middle class twats. So at that stage we weren't sure whether. Do you remember twat and twat? There was a lot of, and at that stage it was twat rather than twat. And this was in New Zealand, so nobody knew what the word meant anyway. So. I
am thrilled to think that people who've tuned in for the first time to hear an Anita Brookner podcast are having to listen to this. Have either of our guests ever been members of a group?
Good God, no, absolutely not.
But you like folk music, Una. You are like you are a folk maven.
I will listen to it and I will sing quietly to myself, but the world does not need to hear me sing. Absolutely.
But I thought that was the point of folk music. You didn't have to have a great voice.
You just turn up and
turn up, join along.
You turn up in the oral tradition.
Keen. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Lucy, you are against music. I think I'm right in saying.
Absolutely. Don't believe in it.
Stop it now.
Stop it now. Exactly.
Another
coincidence.
strange coincidence.
But you said to me,
Anita Brookner, right?
Indeed, right? Yeah. But also, you said to me that there is one song that you know all the words of.
Yes, but I won't be repeating them now.
I'm not asking you to. But we'll shall come on to it.
Middle class twats by the
By the Chartered Accountants.
My new favourite.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Backlisted, the podcast that gives new life to old books. We're gathered in the slightly stuffy lounge of a flat in a mansion block in Maida Vale, loaned to us by our sponsors Unbound, the website where authors and readers come together to create something special. I'm John Mitchinson, the publisher of Unbound.
And I'm Andy Miller, author of The Year of Reading Dangerously. And joining us today, both for the second time, are former guests Una McCormack and Lucy Scholes. Hello.
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 Thank you for coming in. Una is the co-director of the... I'm going to say what Matt's written here. Una is the co-director of the Angela Ruskin Centre for Science Fiction and Fantasy. And your employers won't mind that, will they?
I'm sure they'll be delighted with the name check.
And has written official best-selling books for both the Star Trek and Doctor Who series, and is a New York Times best-selling author.
Woo.
And Una previously joined our happy band to talk about Venetia by Georgette Heyer.
That's
One
right.
of our most successful popular
Indeed.
podcasts to date.
Also, welcome back Lucy Scholes. Lucy is a writer and critic for The Guardian, The Independent and the BBC, amongst others. And she's also a contributing editor to the Buccaneesta website. And she came into Backlisted back in the midst of time to talk about The Vet's Daughter by Barbara Cummings, which is one of our favourite
That
books.
was my favourite discovery from the whole podcast for all of last year.
What a pleasure. It's lovely to know.
Anyway, the book, one of the countless Brookner novels that we could have chosen to discuss, is in fact Look at Me by Anita Brookner. Her third novel, Andy, is that correct?
It is her third novel, yes.
1983?
Three.
And as listeners may or may not know, she wrote 24 novels. Is that right?
24.
Yeah.
24.
Yeah, so this is the third
And did
of
she
it.
miss... She started when she was in her 50s.
50s,
That's right,
yeah. She's
yeah.
pretty much doing one a year until she gets a little bit older, then slows down,
Slows
maybe one
down a
every
bit.
2
Yeah,
or
just-
3.
There's a reason. Well, you will come on to it. But there's the reason for the one a year is stupendous. So
Oh,
we'll wait till we
splendid.
get to it. Anyway,
But, as usual, foul rag and bone shop time, Andy, what have you been reading?
well, I've been reading with great pleasure the memoir of one of my musical heroes, a book called The Cake and the Rain by Jimmy Webb. Now, Jimmy Webb was the author of many great songs that you would know, including perhaps one of the greatest records ever made, Witched Alignment by the late Glenn Campbell. Also, by the time I get to Phoenix, Galveston, Up and Away My Beautiful Balloon.
Oh, I know that one as well.
Right, there you go. And he also wrote the only song that our guest Lucy Scholes knows all the words for, which is...
MacArthur Park.
He wrote MacArthur Park, and the title of his book, The Cake and the Rain, comes from the famous lyric from MacArthur Park. MacArthur Park is melting in the dark, all the sweet green icing flowing down, someone left the cake out in the rain. And Jimmy Webb has spent the last 50 years trying to explain to people what he meant by that bold metaphor. And in fact, the epigraph to this book is a quote from W.H. Auden, which is, "My face looks like a wedding cake left out in the rain." We were talking earlier, you can decide whether Jimmy lifted it from W.H. Auden or whether his point is, I bet people didn't spend that lifetime asking W.H. Auden what he meant by cakes in the rain. So this book, I really enjoyed this book. It is a fascinating account of somebody who had a foot in two camps in the 60s and the 70s. On the one hand, he's in the world of rock and roll in a very revolutionary period, and on the other hand, he's in the world of pure showbiz. And so the book is a repository of stories about people like Sinatra, Glenn Campbell, The Fifth Dimension, Tiny Tim. But on the other hand, there are stories about the Beatles and individual Beatles. There's a story about Paul McCartney here, which was laid down in 1968, and he's waited nearly 50 years to tell. I'm not going to tell it here, but it's so toe-curling, and the book is worth it for that alone. There's also stories about meeting Elvis Presley, there's a story about Joni Mitchell, there's stories about Harry Nilsson, there's stories about Simon and Garfunkel, and so on and so forth. And because this is Jimmy Webb, it's written in a mixture of sort of brilliantly turned anecdotes and then sudden flourishes of prose. For instance, here's a bit where he's talking to the music executive David Geffen. "David," I responded with a burst of enthusiasm, "we'll come to Hawaii. I can't wait." The phone immediately rang again. It was the DEVIL. "What's up?" he asked. "Really?" I asked. "Really," he replied. "Well, I just went to Omaha and kidnapped Susan, and now I'm going to re-kidnap her and take her to Hawaii with David Geffen. It sounds like your sex life is getting complicated," he chortled. "I need a place to stay. How about your place for a while?" "Sure, I could put you up for a while. You can watch the place while I'm away." "Thanks, bud," said the devil as he hung up. And somewhere in the high belfry of the Exoverse, Great black bells chimed antitonal and dispersed a low beating of sub-eternal defibrillation throughout all of space, changing the course of time. So that's a bit better than what you get on VH1. And also, I'm going to give a plug to this because it deserves a plug. He will be making a very rare public appearance on the 28th of September at Waterstones in Kensington High Street, which is the shop in which I used to work and where 25 years ago in the returns room, no doubt packing up Anita Brookner books, I remember hearing P.F. Sloane by Jimmy Webb for the very first time. So that will be a nice circularity there of the exoverse.
I mean, it's just, yeah, I mean, it sounds great. But I'm buying, I'm ordering it.
And volume 2 is on the way. The less successful years. So, John, what have you been reading?
Well, I think I've been reading very close to my favourite novel of the last few months, new novel of the last sort of 6 months or so, Preti Taneja's We That Are Young, a massive doorstepper of a novel published by the excellent Gallibegger Press. I guess there's no way around it. It is a retelling of King Lear, set in contemporary India. I mean, which is, yeah, it doesn't really give the plot away, except to say that there are 3 daughters and there is an ageing Indian businessman who runs this massive global corporation out of India that is beginning to creak at the seams, and the book starts with his illegitimate son coming back to Delhi. He's been successful in the West and now is coming back to India, reconnecting with his roots. It is 500 pages long. It ought to be difficult to read. It isn't. It is, I'm pretty sure, her first novel.
It is.
She's an activist and a lecturer at Warwick, and she draws characters, I think, that are completely... It's not... You know, there are Indian novels. There is a drop-down menu, I guess, of things that you would expect to find in Indian novels. Quite a lot of it there. There is an amazing thing. The great storm scene is set in a Delhi slum. The book's about climate change. It's incredibly contemporary. So you feel that you're getting a portrait of Indian life really as it is now. Commercialism. It's the roots of fundamentalism. All the things I guess you would expect to find in a novel given its setting. But for me, it's the best novel set in India that I've read since A Suitable Boy, and that is pretty, for me, high praise.
So this, as you were saying, is picked up by Gallibeggers. Gallibeggers are of course, the publisher who found Eamon McBride after she had been rejected by many people. And I was reading a thing that Sam Jordison wrote about We That Are Young, where he said, by the time it got to us, it came to us with a history of ecstatic rejections. But this is a fascinating publishing thing, and we might talk about this in relation to Brookner as well, about how frequently she published and what effect that had on her career. But in this case, it's perfectly possible for editors to recognise the merits, the literary merits of a book, while also having to make a decision where they say, but how will we sell it?
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of those things that why we need independent publishers, and we need publishers like Gallibeggers to pick these books up.
Absolutely. I mean, it's exactly the reason why Unbound exists, because it's unthinkable that a novel of this quality, she writes gloriously. One of the things I love is that I don't speak Hindi, but there's a lot of Hindi in the text, and it's gloriously italicized throughout. It's kind of, I wouldn't call it in any sense experimental, but she's pushing at the boundaries of the form all the time. I'll read a tiny little excerpt, which is just the guy on the plane, but it just gives you a sense of that kind of collision of cultures. It's an Indian novel, but it's much more universal in its themes. I mean, certainly as I say, the underlying sense of a planet in crisis. I mean, if you like or know King Lear, that's the other thing. It's just brilliant the way. I mean, it's interesting. I read this very soon after I'd read the Camilla Shamsi Home Fire, which is based on Antigone. I'm kind of fascinated that South Asian writers are finding these Western myths and turning them into really convincing contemporary fiction. Anyway, he's on the plane on the way back, but I just thought it gives you a flavour of how well she writes. He calls for another whiskey. Sorry, sir, we only serve unlimited drinks in first class. The flight attendant walks away, her hair so neat, her makeup so pat she could be company made, remote controlled. She sweeps behind the red curtain that divides the rich from the not so much. Beyond that curtain is Wonderland. Drinks and legroom, stewardesses who never say no. The captives of economy surround each other, a tangle of saris, plaits, cardigans, high-heeled sandals slung into empty Dunkin' Donuts boxes. torn-up glamour magazines. The men stretch across the seats, the women clutch the children won't let go of their Nintendo DSs even as they sleep. Dinner is given, not served. Brown plastic lumps in a makhani sauce, rice and pickles, or white plastic lumps with herb sauce instead. He chooses Indian, then Western, cannot stomach anything. Next to him, the newlyweds try to keep food, sachets, cutlery on the tray to eat without elbowing each other. The bride's fork breaks. She uses her fingers for rice. The smells are of rehydrated flesh. The toilets, feet. It's good, and it keeps that up for 500 pages, I have to say. I'm really, really thrilled. I was slightly shocked when it arrived. Thudded on the mat.
How much money is it?
To buy? In your English pounds? In £9.99.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bargain.
7 years work, right? And 500 pages, and it's $9.99.
Yeah, and as I keep saying to people, when you and I were boys, Andy, what was the price of a novel in Waterstones 20 years ago? It was $14.19.
It was more.
In fact, I wish somebody would do that. If there's anybody out there who's good at looking at how things have changed, pricing has changed, I would say that fiction has probably kind of halved in price relatively over the last 20 years. And that's at full price, by the way, because people aren't paying for $14.99. They're paying $9.99 discounted, or $9.99 because it's a paperback original. Preti Taneja, We That Are Young.
Thank you very much. So, are we hearing from an unbound author at this point?
Well, we're not going to hear from an unbound author. We're going to hear from Arifa Akbar, who is...
She's there.
She sat right
She sat there.
She doesn't know this, but who's going to tell us about a very exciting thing that we're launching called Boundless.
Boundless is a site where you can read long essays about topical things, but also universal things, completely quirky things. We're going to get writers to write about subjects that they're passionate about, but also completely counterintuitive things too. The idea of Boundless is to get people reading things that they can't read in newspapers anymore because newspapers just don't have the space for it, or maybe don't even have the imagination for it. We're featuring some pretty amazing writers like Ali Smith, like David Olusoga, like Neil Mukherjee. But I hope they're going to be writing about subjects that are incredibly important or interesting to them, but that people haven't read them writing about before. It's not just essays. We've got Ali Smith and David Olusoga writing about something whimsical or important to them. That's coming up in December and January. But in the meantime, we've got Alex Clark interviewing Siri Husvet. We've got Badisha interviewing the poet and novelist Anne Michaels, who's coming to town, who's coming to London this autumn. We've got wonderful writers like Jenny Erpenbeck and Andrew Solomons writing about in our slot it's a weekly slot called Book of a Lifetime. And this is where writers write about the book that touched them or changed them or made them become writers. So it could be the book they picked up at the age of 13 or the age of 30 or whatever, but it just marked them in a significant way. So the kind of person who would enjoy, I hope, reading Boundless and becoming a Boundless reader would be the sort of person that has the time and the interest to sit down, read 3,000 or 4,000 words on the latest book or on a writer like Andrew Solomons or Preti Taneja. Maybe a book lover, but not necessarily an ideas lover. I'm really impressed by some of the fabulous and imaginative sort of online literary content. There's things like the Literary Hub, there's other sites like that growing, and Boundless is part of that. So it's launching hopefully in a couple of weeks from now, so around early to mid-October. And it's completely free, no subscription. You don't have to sign up for it. You just, we'll put out content for free on all of social media. You can go to Boundless and we'll put a piece of content on every day of the week.
Let's pick this up again shortly.
And so, back to the main subject, the long-awaited main subject of this podcast. I'm slightly superstitious about it because the elephant in the room, very elegant, becardigant elephant in the backlisted room, has been the long-running barely concealed love affair of Andy Miller and Anita Brookner.
It's true.
And finally, he gets to declare his passion, his love.
Well, I'm going
his
to
enthusiasm.
answer my own question first, for once. Andy, where did you first encounter the work of Anita Brookner? And the answer is that it was at school. And I read, it was the first Booker Prize-winning book that I ever read was Hotel du Lac in 1985 when I was 16. And I didn't really get it. I knew nothing of the controversy surrounding the fact that Hotel du Lac won the Booker Prize. We'll come on to that later. But I was just beginning to discover literature that you could go into bookshops and buy from the fiction section. And I thought, oh, Booker won. I've heard of the Booker Prize. So I read Hotel du Lac. I didn't really get it, but I did enjoy it. And when I read Hotel du Lac again last year, I was amazed about how much of it I could actually remember and how much of the tone of it came back and flavour came back. And I read a couple of other Brookners over the years, and then as regular listeners to Backlisted will know, last year, after Anita Brookner died, I thought, I'd like to read another Anita Brookner. And I read Latecomers. And as I said on the episode, I think it's on the Raymond Chandler episode, after I'd read it, I was blown away by it. I cannot remember responding so strongly to a book for a long time. And that sort of led me to read many, many other of her books over the last 18 months. One of the reasons we wanted to do this episode is because we had a tweet from somebody saying, a few weeks ago, saying, where is your Anita Brookner episode? I can't find it. And I just thought, well, I don't want this to be a running joke. I actually sincerely believe these are some of the best books I've ever read. So that's why we're here today. That's why we've plugged the microphone into the desk. So that's my account of where I first came across Anita Brookner. Oon McCormack.
I think I must have read it roughly at the same time. I bet it was the same edition, that sort of little blue paperback. I think my much older sisters had it, and I picked it up because I was trying to read their stuff. I probably was about the same age, 15 or 16. Imagine me, this sort of bookish little girl at a convent school in Merseyside. It was literally the most glamorous thing I had ever read. Oh my, imagine such lives could exist. I aspire to these. It's incredible. So I hooved it up. Like you, I must have understood about one word in four, but something about the lilt of the sentences meant that I then went. I've read very little fiction as a teenager, but I consistently read Anita Brookner, and I think I must have read about the first 10, 11 novels before I went off to university and stopped reading at all. So that's when I first read it. They were incredible. They were a glimpse of a life I barely knew existed.
And what was it you liked about them? Because I have noticed that once people, it's a terrible thing to say, they're quite Moorish. Once you've got the taste for them, you tend to read quite a few.
They're
of
like
them.
that big box of chocolates that Alex and Nick are consuming, aren't they? You put one, yeah. You read one, or you read them very quickly. I can answer that as the sort of ancient reader I am now. As the teenager, I genuinely do think it was a glimpse of a sort of sophistication, a metropolitan life that I didn't know. But at the same time, that bookish girl in a convent school is responding to the story of lonely bookish girls everywhere, I think. So I suspect that was it. And then her language is, you're always going to be beguiled by those sentences, aren't they? Yeah, you always are. So I think that must have been it.
Lucy, what about you?
When I first read her, actually very recently, which I feel is a bit of a cheat on, I feel like I should come on Backlisted and always talk about a long harboured love. But actually, no, for many years, I laboured under that rather stupid impression that she wrote novels about spinsters in the worst possible shape and form a spinster can take. I don't know, I think I always thought that she was along the lines of someone like Ivy Compton Burnett, who I'm not a big fan of, novels about taking tea with curates or things like this. And so I just steered clear of her. And then only probably a couple of years ago, I think I read Hotel du Lac for the first time, because I was writing a piece about hotels in literature. Thought that one would probably fit the bill. And then
The colour of furniture,
Google
the colour of
search.
veal.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, exactly. One of those Goodreads lists or whatever. And then I realised, wow, this is not what I thought it was at all. And very quickly after that, I think I read Look at Me, and that was the one that did the kind of blowing. I mean, I like Hotel du Lac, but Look at Me was the first one I read that I was really kind of blown away by, and it will always be the one I come back to, I think.
Yes, I think Look at Me is it's
an
probably
interesting-
my favourite, I must say.
Speaking as the Brookner ingenue here, because I came to her very late, like this year. That's
You
not
must
quite
have
true.
read- you must have read something.
I'd read Hotel du Lac a long, long time ago, and actually had remembered that I'd quite enjoyed it, and was surprised by how much I'd enjoyed it. But it was at that time not the kind of thing that I was interested in reading more of, being callow and male. But, as listeners will know, tediously, I've come to see the error of my ways. And I have to say, coming back to her work for this podcast has been, as ever, a revelation. She just seems to be in that sort of remarkable strand of 20th century. I mean, the pleasure in reading it is very similar to me to the pleasure in discovering, which, as I again have confessed to, discovering Muriel Spark far too late in life. And rather like Muriel Spark, I'll read the Brookners steadily. I don't want to be without them. I think I love the idea that there are 24. I've read 4 of them, including the one we're talking about today, rather more quickly than anticipated. I think with Start in Life, I like Hotel du Lac and Latecomers, but I really think Look at Me is and we'll talk about why. It grabs you from the absolute, one of the great opening paragraphs, I think.
You mentioned, Lucy, the S word, spinster. And one of the things that it seems to me is revelatory about reading Anita Brookner rather than hearing about Anita Brookner is the more you read, the idea that she only wrote about lonely women.
This is the problem, isn't it? She gets
it seems ludicrous
pushed
to
into
me.
that corner.
Actually ludicrous and insulting to her and to her work. And one of the things that's very significant to me, and I think is little understood about her or little reported, is that she is very funny. She is funny on the page and she's very funny in person. She was a great interview. If you read any interviews with her, she is terrifically amusing in a kind of Eeyore-ish kind of way. And there's a quote here, there's an interview here with Boyd Tonkin. She's talking about the image problem that she had.
Which she sort of...
10 years after Hotel du Lac.
She sort of invented herself.
Yes. This is the constant game.
She perpetuates it all the time as well.
And she goes on and on about the reviews that she gets. I mean, you have to work quite hard to find a bad review.
Yeah.
She says, well, I am a spinster. I make no apologies for that, but I'm neither unhappy nor lonely. I am interested in people who live on their own, people who get left behind, who drop through the net, but who survive. They seem to me quite heroic characters sometimes, but no one inquires about them because they're people who do without much conversation, whose loudest moments are internal. If such characters persist through my novels, that's because I don't know much about them, not because I know them too well. I write to find out what makes them tick.
Yeah.
And she described the process of writing fiction as, and this is brilliant, trying very hard to remember something which has not yet taken place.
Oh, that's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah.
So what she's doing, I think, is mapping out the inner lives of people who are aware of how they are seen by the outside world and constantly challenging them, confirming them. There's a dance going on all the time, I think. And indeed with her public image. Julian Barnes tells a very funny story about he would have lunch with her once a year and it would last 75 minutes. No more, no less.
Everybody said that should very precise.
Towards the end of the main course, she would lean over and say, I'm working on a new book. It's about a lonely woman. Lucy, you wrote a fantastic piece which is available on LitHub.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Right,
yeah.
About Penelope Fitzgerald and Brookner and solitude.
Yeah.
Do you think that there is a kind of constant challenging going on in these books of both the rewards and the punishments of solitude?
Oh, I think very much. And I think that's probably one of the things I love so much about Look at Me, is because, for me at least, it weighs up very kind of cleverly and in a lot of detail the difference between that kind of life that you have. I mean, Frances, the heroine of Look at Me, she lives alone with her housekeeper. Her mother and father have passed away. She lives in their old flat. And she is an aspiring writer. And she's able to write because of this solitude that she has in her life, the way that she looks at people, she's always observing them, she's writing. But she also wants to be living this life outside of that, but she can't have it both ways. And I think that's what's so wonderful about the book, is that she pushes towards trying to be part of other people's lives. But when she pushes sort of too far into that, the yearning to be by herself comes back into play again. So I think it's just a very clever book in telling you the sort of both sides of the story. And so that one is not, loneliness is very different to solitude. And there's a push and a pull there at work, which I think is obviously, I don't want to say that's exactly what's going on in Brookner's life, but if you read some of the interviews, she's very happy with the decision that she's made, or she says she's happy with the decision she's made to be alone and work.
It's that old paradox, though, isn't it? She's very at pains to always say that she's not her characters and that her life is very different. And yet, and yet, when you actually look at the biographical details, the sense that she has, that sort of thing, it comes up in this book, the Darwinian sense, that through accidents of birth or the nature of her relationship with her parents and bad and difficult parents, I mean, that's her first book, A Start in Life, is about a spectacularly nightmarish parental situation, which she kind of, the heroines always deal with to some degree. They kind of rise above or cope with or cauterise the pain. But it does leave them kind of isolated and finding it difficult. In Look at Me, I find that whole thing where she says, she's just not the couple that she wants to be like and wants to be part of, Alex and Nick. She feels that they are of a different Darwinian order, that they are kind of they're
sort of Ubermensch,
and she can't, insofar as there is a plot in this book.
I think there's we joke a lot about the food. There's sort of simultaneously there's a real sort of famished nature to the characters, I think, and a kind of hunger, but at the same time this sort of distaste and revulsion that there's just something too fleshly about these people.
She's just not on food. Rachel, my wife, used to do her publicity, and she used to have to go out with Anita, and I mean the stories are all, but she said she would very often, you'd go out for lunch and she would smoke, but it would be steamed. She'd eat steamed vegetables, and she'd be quite happy sort of picking away at that. But she also tells that humour thing. There's a story that Julian Barnes tells, which Rachel was there for, where she gets in to sign books in the office. And at a certain point, there's about 1,000, and she's done 50, and she says, I think that'll do. And Rachel's going, no, you wait. But she did that once because she went into Hatchards with her, and she gasped. She said, you never heard Anita gasp. She looked at the pile of books, and she had to do it. And then she said at the end of the session, the signing session, she got out and on Piccadilly. She said she suddenly got skittish and leapt onto the back of a route master bus and said, I have to go now, dear, and waved and went off down the street. She said it was like a sort of weird 1950s musical.
But moment of brief encounter or something,
I think she's so good. I mean, Look at Me particularly is such a good book about solitude, yes, but also about writers and writing, and about the compromise that exists between looking at the world and then secluding yourself from the world, claustration.
Yeah, she loves that word, doesn't she?
In order to write it down. Una, have you got
I have a little bit, yes. It's from the start of chapter 6 of Look at Me. It was then that I saw the business of writing for what it truly was and is to me. It is your penance for not being lucky. It is an attempt to reach out to others and to make them love you. It is your instinctive protest when you find you have no voice at the world's tribunals and that no one will speak for you. I would give my entire output of words, past, present, and to come, in exchange for easier access to the world, for permission to state I hurt, or I hate, or I want. Or indeed, look at me. And I do not go back on this. For once a thing is known, it can never be unknown. It can only be forgotten. And writing is the enemy of forgetfulness, of thoughtlessness. For the writer, there is no oblivion, only endless memory. Wow.
I just actually punched the air.
Some of it.
Sheer truthfulness of it.
And the beauty of it, and speaking it is just
and the way she doesn't,
joy.
she works that Look at Me theme, from the first kind of brilliant paragraph about memory.
I wonder what the book that Frances writes would be. Would it be the comic novel that she hints at in the text?
I think it's this book.
I think there's a sense towards the end that it is this book. Let's do the blurb.
Okay, so this is the blurb for the first edition of Look at Me. This is Anita Brookner's third novel. She published A Start in Life and Providence to very, very positive reviews, I think I'm right in saying. So here we go. This is, if you haven't read it, here's what's in store for you. Melancholy came next to madness in Frances Hinton's filing system. She worked in the reference library of a medical research institute dedicated to the study of problems in human behaviour. There were a number of borderline cases sitting and working in the library itself, and Frances could be scathingly funny about their quirks on paper. Writing helped to lighten the load of those qualities thought to be essential to a librarian. In fact, Frances would have been happy to throw her sterling qualities out of the window for a little of what Nick and Alex had. Frances always found herself trying to attract Nick's attention in the library. He exuded charm when he had the time, good looks, good health, and good luck. His wife, Alex, was equally dazzling. When she was taken up by this legendary couple, and I'm just interjecting to say here, of course, Nick and Alex, Nicholas and Alexandra, you can interpret that how you want, but the names of the great Russian dynastic duo. When she was taken up by this legendary couple, Frances thankfully abandoned most of her critical faculties and worked hard at picking up some of their saving nonchalance. It was through them that she made some new friends and discovered new possibilities and impossibilities. They were, in fact, to provide her with her sentimental education. Anita Brookner's third novel is a triumph. How such an uncompromising gaze at loneliness can manage to be so vastly enjoyable as well as moving is something to which only Anita Brookner holds the secret.
That's really good.
That's really good. That's just as your head was drooping with misery. Should I try and give it a little push at the end?
But remember, she's funny.
She's funny. Yeah.
That's the thing, though, isn't it? That what lives that you were saying, about the sentences. Just the not a massive amount happens in the novel, and you're not quite sure. In fact, we should talk about what does happen without giving too much away. I think
nothing and everything.
Nothing and everything is exactly right, isn't it? You know. It's an Anita Brookner novel, and if you've read at least one, you know that there's so much optimism when she discovers the relationship with Nick and Alex is full of optimism. But because she's such a good writer, she leaves enough of a trail for you to know that this isn't likely to work out well.
Yeah, Lucy, is Frances a reliable narrator?
I don't think she's an unreliable narrator in the classic sense of the term, but she is unreliable in as much as there are certain confusions in terms of the plot, aren't there? Like because the whole relationship...
She deliberately conceals the prior relationship, doesn't she?
She conceals the prior relationship. Yeah. She doesn't sort of... She also plays... I don't know. I mean, I find Frances incredibly intriguing, not because... I mean, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that this push and pull situation between loneliness and solitude and sort of life and action and staying inside and writing, that what makes me much more intrigued by her than a kind of perhaps the impression you might have from just reading that blurb is the way that she constantly pushes against these options she has to move out into the wider world. All those, because Alex and Nick, without giving too much information away, but they have a spare bedroom in their house that Alex talks about her moving into. Yeah. And it's she pushes back against this. She sort of, and then little things happen and she
knows something important will be eaten.
Exactly. She's very aware of what she will lose if she kind of moves into the light and sort of starts this life. So she's unreliable in one sense, but I don't think it's, when if you say unreliable narrator, that gives a certain impression.
And yet, she's not. It's not exactly unreliable, is it? It's just her judgment. You don't entirely trust her judgment. She believes she believes that James is in love with her, and yet it's
you can never be sure.
You're never sure, and the scene, the climactic scene in her bedroom comes as a shock to the reader as well as an absolute shock to her.
And it's such a confusing one.
It's never really unpacked.
It's never unpacked. We're never quite sure of who wanted what, why he behaves the way he does.
Not with you, Frances, not with you.
What does that mean in so many ways? There's so many ways you could read that. And yet, because we only ever see it through her, because we only ever see it through her point of view, that is the kind of unreliability of the narration.
And she's bewildered and confused and doesn't understand his motives, and possibly he has not been the man that she has fantasised or imagined. I think the romantic hero that's always running through the Brookner novel.
But also, she says in the first few pages of the book, "I am invulnerable." This is why I think the creation of the character is so brilliant in this book. That clearly, as the book goes on, you learn that she had suffered a tremendous breakdown after what we might assume was an adulterous affair of some kind.
Yeah.
She prefers not to talk about it. I never speak of it, is what she says, in fact, several times. And therefore the will, she has created a way of living which is about protecting herself from further harm.
Well, protection is a great theme, isn't it? When she first feels James's arm around her shoulder, she said it's the first time she's felt protected since she was a...
And I think the sadness of the book is, she allows herself to feel that there might be another way to living, which would be more rewarding, which would allow her to join the ranks of these people who take what they want when they want. And of course, she's cruelly, it's the word, dispossessed of that.
Well, she doesn't know how to play by their rules. I mean, I also find the idea of her innocence very interesting, because she's obviously not as innocent, I mean, we're talking sexually innocent, as someone like Alex assumes she is. No. Yeah. Because there are vague references, veiled ones, to her having had a sexual relationship before.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yet at the same time, we sort of almost led to assume that maybe she hasn't.
Little orphan Fanny.
Yes, and then this way... Also, don't you think that's fascinating? Then on the very first page, she makes a point, she says, my name is Frances Hinton, and I do not like to be called Fanny. And yet Alex and James continually... Alex and Nick call her Fanny all the time. Yeah. She puts up with these sort of odd... I don't know, it's so hard to trust her sometimes, but equally you don't feel that she's trying to kind of put the water in your eyes.
She's writing that afterwards, isn't she, as well, the kind of...
Yes, if this is the book she's written as well, then...
She has been, it seems to me, willing to be infantilised in terms of her relationship with her mother and in terms of the relationship with the woman who lives in the flat, the cleaner, and Nancy. And then again, she does the same thing while thinking she's embracing this far more racy world. Bohemian world, Alex Nick. She's their child. She's like their child again.
Do you think it's meant to evoke Fanny Price from Mansfield Park? I wonder. These things are not carelessly done by Brookner, I think.
There's a lovely part. This is from chapter 8, where she just says, I wanted, you see, talking about the failed relationship with James, I wanted, you see, to make it all come out right this time. I wanted contentment and peace for myself, for him, and I wanted the approbation of others. Perhaps above all, the approbation of others. I wanted it to go according to plan. I even wanted the small satisfactions of congratulations and good wishes. I wanted to see the smiles on the faces of Mrs. Halloran and Dr. Simic as they raised glasses to me. I wanted, for once in my life, a celebration. To make up for all the sadness, all the waste and confusion, all the waiting, the sitting in sick rooms, the furtive returns and the lying mourning face. I wanted, more than anything, a chance to be simple once again, as I was meant to be, and as I had been long ago, a long, long time ago. It's pretty good.
She says something similar here very near the end of the book. I find this incredibly moving, actually. It seemed to me that I, rather than he, had brought this about, and my despair was extreme. For now that I knew that I loved him, it was his whole life that I loved. And I would never know that life. Changes would no doubt take place, and I would not even know what they were. How is he, I would long to ask, but there would be no one to ask. If I were to pass him in the corridor or in the library, I would have to smile like the stranger he wanted me to be. And if I wished to please him, I must simply stay away. And his life would go on without me, and I would have no knowledge of it. And since I had apparently understood so little, I could not even blame him. I get things wrong, you see.
Yeah.
That I get things wrong is so
heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it is in all senses a harrowing book, and that chapter 11, that penultimate chapter, where
it's like breakdown chapter.
It's this descent into hell.
The long walk home.
Well, this is another thing that
she's
so brilliant at. I think that
it's one of the great set pieces I've read.
Yeah. This idea of Brookner writing these sort of polite books. One of the things that really struck me when I started reading them in earnest is if she wants to be funny, she's funny.
Absolutely.
If she wants to be dramatic, she's dramatic. If she wants to chart someone's nervous breakdown and allow a sort of almost, actually Aikman-like horror to start flowing in, the description of the walk across Hyde Park and through
It's horrendous. I mean, it's truly
it's
dark.
a classic. Also, if you're looking at it's a classic trigger, the terrible scene with the slapping on of the pudding in the restaurant, which essentially
Yes.
triggers a depressive episode. I mean,
Yeah.
and what she narrates brilliantly, and but that whole feeling, it's a brilliant thing that she said to I think it was a Mick Brown interview. She said she'd always admired Freud, but had resisted any temptation to undergo a psychoanalysis. It wasn't within my scope. And one doesn't know how intelligent the interrogator would be, which is such a classic Brookner.
We're going to come on to the biography in a moment because we've got a little clip, but I just want to read this. I was sent this by our friend Ewan Tant. This is the beginning of an introduction to an edition of Red Lights by her great favourite Georges Simenon that she wrote for the New York Review of Books about 10 years ago. This is the beginning of the introduction. See if this rings any bells. Introduction. The formula is simple but subtle. A life will go wrong, usually because of an element in the protagonist's makeup which impels him to self-destruct, to willfully seek disgrace, exclusion, ruin in his search for a fulfillment, and a fatal freedom which take on an aura of destiny. In a genre which has since been exploited but never truly replicated, Simenon examines this phenomenon time after time and in a variety of settings. A man, and it is almost invariably a man, will suddenly act out of character and for no apparent reason. This divergence from his normal pattern of behaviour will lead him to abandon all safety, all caution, in the interest of that illusory freedom. This momentary rapture against which he has no defence will ensure his downfall, but the rash act will empower him in ways he has perhaps sought, almost unknowingly, all his life. But for women. In the case of Brookner.
Every novel she's written.
Although, do you think it's from the rash act, or do you think the tragedy, back to Greek tragedy again, do you think the tragedy in her heroines is that they don't act out of character enough?
Yeah, I'm fascinated, but I'm fascinated by the whole cult around Brookner. So I'm fascinated why what is it about Brookner that's so attractive to people now in a way that it seems to have gathered. I mean, it's the most anticipated on Twitter, at least. never an echo chamber, obviously. But I'm fascinated. But what is it about Brookner that people connect to?
Well,
I mean, my little theory that I push out is that she genuinely writes about people whose lives don't turn out particularly well, and that sense, particularly, a lot of people have as they're getting older, of disappointment, of early promise not having been fulfilled, of relationships either not working or not happening, and that terrible sense that she has in all the books of time passing, of age, and
age,
she writes more kind of brilliantly about the sort of the decline. I mean, she says somewhere, in life there are no happy endings because the body gives you away, it lets you down, it betrays you, and you're tied to morality and there's no escape. Age is the final betrayal.
This ties in my theory about Brookner, or the reason why it's showing my psychological hand, but she writes brilliantly, unlike many writers write about the result of their characters' actions, the result of their actions.
Yeah.
What Brookner writes about brilliantly, in my opinion, is how you manage what is done to you.
Yeah.
And inaction as
And
well.
By the failure of the body, by friends, by enemies, by
internal fear.
What your parents. Bad parenting, that's one of the great...
Bad parenting.
Inadvertent bad parenting, in fact. How do you live a noble, correct existence with whatever hand you may have been dealt? That is what Brookner writes about, I think.
And they're very internal, aren't they? She's always going for walks, having baths, and thinking. That thing of having to, in Hotel du Lac and in all, that thing of the heroine having to go and process the things, that, as you say, that are being done to her, that are happening to her.
Yeah, it's all about that.
Almost that sort. It's almost more like Camus, Sartre, a sort of middle of the century sense of it's just the difficulty of having relationships. And
Exactly,
maintaining relationships.
but it's the ordinary difficulties of life as well. It's exactly those. There's nothing.
Unlike in those books, there's no. Her heroines aren't made into exemplary figures. In a way, that's what I love about the way she writes. Is that at the end of this book, you don't quite know what you feel about Frances Hinton. You do feel a bit sorry for her. You feel slightly, but I guess it's the book that you've got in your hand is the sort of the point, isn't it?
But there are many pleasures in reading her. I think obviously the sentences, the construction of the plot, the psychological intelligence. This about would the therapist be clever enough?
Yeah.
And the structure of this as you read it is just when you reread it, I think to see how meticulously she's built the book is a real pleasure.
I just want to say a bit. We need to put some context to the biography of Anita Brookner's life, of several achievements before she became a novelist.
Yeah.
So, but first, I'm just going to read this was her biography for many years in the front of all editions of her books. Anita Brookner was born in London in 1928, and apart from 3 postgraduate years in Paris, has lived there all her life. She trained as an art historian and taught at the Courtauld Institute of Art until 1988, when she abandoned her title of Reader in the History of Art at the University of London for the anonymity of a small flat in Chelsea and the cultivation of certain fictional characters who may one day appear in future novels. So good.
This leaves aside being the first.
Well, this is it. So the thing about Anita Brookner, so she's born in 1928. She's the only child of Newsom Brookner, a Jewish immigrant from Poland, and Maud Schiska, a singer. And her mother, on marriage, was obliged to stop singing. And I think there is a character in one of the novels who is a singer who has been obliged to stop singing. Not a happy character. And Brookner grew up, so she had quite a solitary childhood, very few other children around, lots of aunts, big Jewish family, very literary. She says her father gave her the works of Dickens to read at quite a young age, hoping to teach her. She said he hoped that it would teach me about social injustice, but all I ended up thinking was that everyone in England had a funny name.
Doesn't she get one on her birthday from him? Isn't that what?
Yes, that's right, yeah. So she becomes an academic, an art historian. In 1967, she became the first woman to hold the Slade Professorship of Fine Art at Cambridge University. She was promoted to reader at the Courtauld Institute of Art in 1977, where she worked until her retirement in 1988. And she would often talk about how much the Courtauld meant to her. We have a clip here. It's an episode of The Reunion from about 5 years ago on Radio 4, which featured people from the Courtauld talking about, amongst others, Anthony Blunt and the effect that Anthony Blunt, and indeed on this programme, John, Michael Jacobs also contributes, who we talked about on the last episode, and Brian Sewell and Niall Ferguson. But here is Brookner talking about the effect that art and the Courtauld had on her life.
Well, I went to school in Dulwich and went into the Dulwich Picture Gallery on a regular basis and was absolutely entranced and puzzled by what I saw. And I wanted to know more. I gave the odd lecture, but I wasn't on the staff until, I think, 1964.
And Anita, what did the Courtauld give you?
A whole life, really. Everything that came after was very dull.
Even the success as a writer?
Oh, that was far less interesting.
Really?
Yes.
It was your life?
Yes.
I mean...
Many things that you do not hear voices like that anymore, do you?
But they will say that she used to, you could feel the semicolons and the punctuation.
There's one of the facts about Brookner which makes my toes crinkle up with happiness, is that she writes her first novel, A Start in Life, at the age of 53. Do you know why? Because she didn't want to have to go outdoors during the summer holidays, during the long vacation from the Courtauld. And so, in order just to fill the vacation, she thought, I'll have a go at writing a novel.
I'll have a go. Other people do it.
That's another theme, isn't it? That aching long periods of time that these characters have to fill. It's so totally foreign to any of us.
At least for the first few years of her novel writing career, that is what she did. She would say, I write my novels for 2 reasons. 1, to fill the summer, and 2, to see if I can do it again.
Yeah. She also didn't revise them, the earlier ones in particular. No. It's always, she would maybe tweak the ending, she said, but she would literally
just
just
write them. This is one of the
amazing
amazing things. This is what Julian Barnes said about A Start in Life. He said, can you think of a better first novel that has apparently been written with no prior drafts, no false starts, and no short stories. It is one of the greatest. We're constantly used to running her down. There's a thing we keep coming back to while she was publishing and while she was alive, of being this small novelist, this niche novelist, and yet the achievement to write that first book and have it be pretty much perfect,
but I think
have the voice there.
Isn't it also because she doesn't make a song and dance about it? She doesn't sort of publicise herself. She doesn't make a big deal out of it. So therefore she just does this, she turns it out, then she does another one the next year. And
deprecates them.
Yes, exactly. And she doesn't really feel...
I love that she got some of the feminist criticism from the great Blake Morrison 94 thing. She said, "Life is not a nightclub."
Life is not a nightclub.
And some of the reviews I've had, particularly from women, which I assume that is, seem to have been quite defensive. These women are angry. They believe they can get what they want from life. Maybe they're just lucky enough not to have found out that they can't. Such a damning thing to do. They're lucky enough not to find out. And Rachel tells that story, and she said that I think it was either Liz Calder or Carmen Khalil was having lunch with her once, and as occasionally there'd be quite long pauses, they started to burble about their children and their life, and she just got up and she said, "You have had everything that I have not," and then just walked out of the lunch.
Just a little bit too old for it, that 1926, that these are women who were born 20 years later who are going, no, I'm going to have the publishing career, I'm going to have this, I'm going to have the family, I'm going to have the affair and the romance with numerous men, and she's just that bit too old.
I love the piece of information that after the success of Hotel du Lac, and we should say Hotel du Lac, which won the Booker Prize, very controversial Booker Prize winner in the same year that Julian Barnes was nominated for Flaubert's Parrot, and infamously J.G. Ballard was nominated for Empire of the Sun. But after the success of Hotel du Lac, which became a great bestseller, she didn't buy a second home, but she bought the flat next door in her mansion block, where she would. But it's where she would go and write. It's actually perfectly sensible. Where she had, so she had the flat next door. When she wanted to work, she would go next door.
I mean, she's so full of paradoxes, though. There's a great thing in that interview as well when it talks about marriage. And she said, well, there were a couple of people who proposed, but never remotely took them seriously. But then she says, if we could have got the difficulties of the proposal out of the way and settled down as perhaps two old people with small children, that would have been an ideal setup. Then I could have got on with my reading and writing and all the rest of it. Yeah. But I really didn't want to be taken over. So she was a feminist, but she was just her own...
But she didn't like those early novels, did she? Or she said she didn't like them.
Well, no, there's that interview from 1984 where she says, "Look at me as a very depressed and debilitated novel. It's the one I regret. When I published it, a very old friend of my mother's summoned me and said, 'You are getting yourself a bad reputation as a lonely woman. Stop it at once.'" She was right. It sticks.
10 years after that, she said, "I hate those early novels. I think they're crap."
Yeah.
But that's the true answer, isn't it? She says that they're not as interesting as what I'm doing now. And what I'm doing now is not receiving nearly as much attention.
Yeah. Well, she says also she would change the end of Hotel du Lac. She wished that she'd made Edith choose to get married. She wished that Edith would...
That's for it. Now,
why did she say
Hotel du
that?
Lac, I think, it was very interesting rereading that on the back of having just read a lot of Heyer for this, because I think it's her... Georgette Heyer novel. I'm convinced that she's read the whole of Heyer, because she refers to several times in
and that's who Edith is, right? She's
a romantic novelist. It's constructed
under a more
very
thrusting
like
name.
a thrusting name. That's right.
It's like the veal-coloured furniture.
Hope or Charity or something.
And this is fascinating. You know, Hotel du Lac is dedicated to Rosamund Lehman.
Well, Rosamund Lehman was one of her favourite authors, wasn't
and Lehman would refer to Hotel du Lac as my novel.
No, didn't know that.
And I see my novel has won the Booker Prize. And also, is it Family and Friends? No, A Friend from England is dedicated to Carmen Khalil.
Oh,
you know, she has this very interesting, ambivalent relationship with feminism. Simultaneously, one of her closest personal friends is the publisher of Virago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's true for many, many women of her generation.
I think what Una's saying is right. It's got to be something to do with the time, because she's living this amazing feminist life in one hand, but she doesn't recognise it.
And then she sees these younger women who are able to say, for whatever reasons, I'm having this, I'm having it all, and I'm going to have everything. And she goes, well, it was one or the other for me. It was writing or it was family. It was being the first woman professor so that you could be the second one.
I think she writes so elegantly as well about being an outsider, being unmarried, being a spinster, being an intellectual, being Jewish.
Yeah.
You know, all these things that are not factored into her.
Being female.
How she has been talked about. And also, John, there's the issue of, I think it's interesting that people we're in the business, we understand what's meant when people say, well, she published a novel a year and that worked against her. But it probably did, because some kind of fatigue would set in amongst publishers and literary editors. How do you find something new to say on an annual basis about somebody who is...
Especially when they are vaguely similar. I mean, there is their charm for people like us who love her, right? But actually, it didn't work particularly in her favour. And I think a lot of reviews, particularly towards the end of her life, did make sometimes snide comment about like another Anita Brookner novel. I've not read any of the later ones.
No.
I mean,
Does the standard keep up?
I'm 6 away from the end.
Oh.
I've just read Falling Slowly.
Right.
Falling Slowly is...
It's as good as any of them.
I
It's
love
wonderful.
That's an excellent one.
So I was going to say, where would you go next? I want to read one. I just wanted to go.
Latecomers, if you haven't read Latecomers.
Closed Eye. I really like
Closed Eye's wonderful.
Yeah.
You've got a copy of A Private View there, Una, as well. I love that.
I've just started this one. It's absolutely brilliant. I got through that on the train earlier, so you can't put them down. They're like thrillers.
They are.
My theory about Britain, there's a really interesting piece on his blog by our former guest, Jonathan Gibbs, the novelist Jonathan Gibbs, where he had read a couple of Brookner's books, and he said, these don't really work in terms of narrative, the way I would teach narrative in fiction in a creative writing sense. These don't really work. I really like Jonathan. It really gave me pause for thought, thinking about why don't they work. And I think the reason why they don't follow the rules is that a lot of the time the rules that Brookner is following, although she has a great respect for the 19th century novel in particular, in a sense it's her background as an expert on art which is coming into play in the novels. They are like portraits. They are often, she'll do something in the opening chapter of the book where she will literally sketch out what she is going to write about. She will mark out her canvas. And then as each chapter goes on, she goes to a different part of the canvas and fills it in. And what she does brilliantly is go back to the same bit of that canvas 5 chapters later, scrub it out a little bit, repaint it. So you only understand the picture that you're looking at, in fact, hence the title, Look at Me, when you get to the end of the book, when you can suddenly see the picture that you've been watching being painted before your eyes.
I also think it's a sort of, each scene is a tableau, and then she goes home and she unpacks the psychological significances, the possibilities. She replays different versions of how the scene might have gone. It is that observer, that thing that she writes about being, the person who watches. And there's a wonderful passage where she talks about it has to be funny. Even towards the end, it has to be funny. She has to turn it into something that's funny, which it is. Quite.
Have you got a copy of A Start in Life, though?
Yeah.
So you're talking about it has to be funny. These are the first words we have to assume that she wrote in fiction. I think this is one of the funniest things I've ever read. The opening of, supposedly, the slightly miserable Anita Brookner's A Start in Life. Dr. Weiss, at 40, knew that her life had been ruined by literature. In her thoughtful and academic way, she put it down to her faulty moral education, which dictated, through the conflicting, but in this one instance, united agencies of her mother and father, that she ponder the careers of Anna Karenina and Emma Bovary, but that she emulate those of David Copperfield and Little Dorrit. But really it had started much earlier than that, when, at an unremembered moment in her extreme infancy, she had fallen asleep enraptured as her nurse breathed the words, "Cinderella shall go to the ball." The ball had never materialised. Literature, on the other hand, was now her stock in trade, if trade were an apt description of the exchange that ensued 3 times weekly in her pleasant seminar room, when students, bolder than she had ever been, wrinkled their brows as if in pain when asked to consider any writer less alienated than Camus. They were large, clear-eyed and beautiful. Their voices rang with confidence, but their translations were narrow and cautious. Dr. Weiss, who preferred men, was an authority on women.
Savage. It's absolutely savage. It's brilliant.
I think you used the word at one point, merciless, Andy, which is exactly right.
Before we go, I just must give a mention. We are all big fans of the blog brooknerian.blogspot.co.uk, and you can find Tom Sabine. I'm going to say Sabine. He may contact me to tell me. Hello, Tom. This blog is a magnificent blog devoted to Brookner and all matters Brookner, which you will very much enjoy if you read Look at Me or Latecomers or any of these books.
And lots of daily updates on Twitter as well. So you should follow him on Twitter.
Surely the perfect place to
end. Encroaching night.
We exit the Brookner Dome. Thanks to Lucy Scholes, to Una McCormack, to our producer Matt Hall, and once again to our sponsors Unbound. You can get in touch with us on Twitter at BacklistedPod, on Facebook at BacklistedPod, and our page on the Unbound site, unbound.com/backlisted. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another show in a fortnight.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Bye.
You can choose to listen to Backlisted with or without adverts. If you prefer to listen to it without adverts, you can join us on our Patreon at patreon.com/backlisted, where you also get bonus content of 2 episodes of Locklisted, the podcast where we talk about the books and films and music that we've been listening to over the last couple of weeks.